have everything 100% right for the race. It's compulsory for competitors to attend this briefing.
Race day dawned crisp and chilly as the crews readied themselves for the start. For some reason, and no one's quite fathomed out why, there's always last-minute work to do on a racing car.
Even though the vehicle's been prepped the night before and put into the impound, there's little things to do like top up your fuel, make sure the tank's 100% before you leave on a 1,000k journey.
This morning we're going to just take it easy until the refuel. Once it starts leveling out, we might pick up our pace. But our aim is to get to the refuel at the overnight stop with everything in order, and tomorrow will be the race back, because 2 years we had the same situation. We were 34 minutes behind at the refuel and we crossed the line first, so the race is actually won or lost on the second day, not on the first day.
Frans Čepek made a welcome return to the sport.
Yeah, beginning of the year started off not too bad at Tarkenstad with a new car, but next race after Barberspun we had a major accident. I nearly lost my hand, but doctors managed to put it together again, and we are back, not in full force, but more or less in full force. Last year we won this event, and this year we're going to give it another bash, see what we can do.
From the start at Gaborone, the route took competitors northwest towards the designated service point, which was once again near the village of Lethlekeng. Then it was onto a 200-kilometre-plus loop, which brought them back to the service point, which also served as the camping grounds for the overnight halt. With no time trial to determine the starting order, competitors were grouped together according to championship points and then drew lots for their starting position. Hein Gieser backed the important slot for his Protea Conveyors Toyota Hilux, and his navigator's son Michael had the unenviable task of finding the route, quite a responsibility for a 16-year-old schoolboy. Following them was Marius Bahrain in the Mighty Mag Special and the Birkin brothers, Andrew and Chris, in the turbo diesel Toyota Hilux. Missing from the lineup were Woolwich and Vermaak, whose Mitsubishi Pajero had suffered engine problems before leaving the base in Pietermaritzburg. Botswana in winter is dry and dusty, and there's little breeze to clear the air for those starting at 30-second intervals behind the Gieser team. Apart from the discomfort of dust, Bahrain had little protection against the cold in his Mighty Mag. Compare the comfort levels, as the Birkins have a nicely insulated cab. Reiniger and Houghton started fourth, with the Class B special of Billy Bond and Graham Newton completing the top 6 starters.
Well, these competitors now are highly pumped. You know, you've got an adrenaline rush, and it's very important in the first 60 kilometers of the race to concentrate. These guys are going to have a hard time for this first 30 kilometers because it's through a village and it's not very well marked. So the guys don't want to make a mistake then, because the guys are on top of each other and you're going to get past the guy immediately, and it's going to be a big problem because you're going to lose a spot and then you're going to have to drive in his dust.
It didn't take long before Reiniger and Houghton caught up with the Gieser's less powerful Hilux. As soon as there was room, Gieser moved over and gave the 4.5-litre Land Cruiser room to pass safely. By this time, Bahrain was enjoying a handy lead, but without a navigator, he was losing precious time as he picked his way through the thorn bushes, and an anxious glance behind him showed that he was expecting to be caught fairly soon. The Birkin brothers were running strongly, and their torquey turbo diesel power seemed ideal for the twisty nature of this section of the route, which even featured a small water splash. Tony Yeo is a hard-charging driver, and the BMW-powered Sabert Land Rover 90 is one of the best-sounding vehicles in off-road racing. And once again, his wife Mandy was in the hot seat reading the route schedules.
This part of the route is taking the guys up towards the mountain pass, and it's very important now that you keep on the track. If you make a mistake, you're going to be taken out, and it's going to take you a long time to get back into the race. So as you'll see, these competitors are being very careful. It's a long way to go. There's nothing to be won by winning the race in the first 30 kilometers. You'll see Richard Carolyn going through there, taking it easy. You'll see later on during the race the guys will take it a little bit harder. But at this stage, you know, the guys have done a lot of preparation on the vehicles, and they don't want to be out the race and back drinking beer after 10 minutes or 20 minutes of racing. Colin Frankenberg and his wife are top competitors. They've been trying hard for the past couple of years, but he enjoys his sport. And as for Bevan Berthold, he's a newcomer to the sport. He's a bit of a hard charger, but I think as he gets older, he'll get wiser because his checkbook will get a bit smaller. A nice change is that Frans Čepek Jr. is driving the whole race. The Klerksdorp crew of Hein Grobler and Charles Bormerans are going to be very good to beat in the Toyota two-wheel drive Hilux.
Another reliable Toyota Hilux crew are Karel van Vuren and Koffie Versveld, who won Class E at the Barberspun 500 in March. If there was an award for the unluckiest driver, then surely Nardus Alberts would be in line for it. One year he was forced to spend the night in the desert after his service crew failed to find him before nightfall. Lesotho's Wilfried Vaslao missed the first 2 rounds of the season, but ran well in Natal and is looking for a top 3 finish. Last year, Skalkberger raced quads, but purchased the ex-Mike Redden turbo diesel Land Rover for this year. With navigator Douglas Driver, he was looking for a good points haul. Richard Schilling and Ashley Thorne won Class A last year, but a holiday skiing accident resulted in Schilling missing the first 2 rounds of the year. Coetzee and Swanepoel have yet to finish a race in their innovative factory-entered Castrol Toyota Hilux double cab turbo.
This innovative vehicle is having teething problems at the moment, but once they get it right, it's going to be a hell of a car.
This Toyota Land Cruiser is in the hands of Cecil Fincham, who has a lot of experience on this race. With navigator Frick de Klerk, they hold 5th place in Class D. On board with Cliff Barker and Heinrich Lattergan as they tackle the little river crossing and head into the blinding sun with a Pennzoil Land Rover V8.
Cliffy's M3 engined Land Rover is going to be very competitive as it's based on RP Reinike's type of vehicle with the engine backed up, and they're going to be in the front next year.
Nick Harper has a new navigator, Andrew Chalupsky, with him for this season. An hour after the car started, it was time for the quads to leave the starting blocks. There was a big field of quads in the lineup, and KwaZulu-Natal rider Paul Chomser started from the front, with 200 rider Costello next. Wildman Jacques Struik was on one of the few 4-stroke quads in the field, while Van Deventer had to make up 10 places in order to get to the front. This is perhaps the most physically demanding race on the calendar for quad riders. Unlike a motorcycle, a quad doesn't fit into the wheel tracks made by cars, and the riders are constantly fighting for control. 1,000 grueling kilometers lie ahead as Chomser pulls away from the crowds at the start. Unlike the first car, though, he at least had the advantage of having wheel tracks to follow. Costello on the single-cylinder 200 would soon be caught by the bigger-engined Class L quads of Jacques Struik and Paul Breckel, who started behind him.
The quad fields have grown tremendously. At the last race in Sugarbelt, we had 40 entries. In this race, we've got another 40. We're expecting big things now, and it's a good place for guys to start. It's not expensive, and you can get up and start racing for a very little amount of money.
Polaris rider Niels van der Walt is 5th in the championship, 1 point ahead of Chomser. It was an important race for both riders.
If we get past the rocks, the sand, being a man from Natal, I think the sand will be my advantage, yeah. And I don't think the guys will catch me in the sand.
The first real test of this race is the dreaded riverbed. Thanks to El Nino, it was dry, 30-odd kilometers of power and energy-sapping, choking sand. The only way through is to stand far back, keep the throttles wide open, and let the bike dance around underneath. It's certainly not for the faint-hearted. Another problem is that the ruts left by cars tend to pull the quad, but often a rider becomes a passenger. Struik looks around and finds himself being pulled into a rut. That hole caught Christo van der Bava by surprise, and the championship leader was lucky to emerge unscathed.
This riverbed's very difficult to do, especially when it's dry. And the reason being is that the local population have to get water, and they dig deep holes to get to the water. And it's very uneasy to see them. As you can see, Bodo and Gary got stuck here. But also have a look at their tyres. They got the wrong choice of tyres for this type of event. You want something that's going to get on top of the sand and doesn't dig it in. And as they're pulling in, you can see they're not making too much progress in this part of the race. The track is hard on the outsides, and guys tend to go towards the outside, towards the banks to get more traction, but this is where you get stuck, and once your car's floating, it's best to stick to the existing track and stay on top of the sand.
It wasn't long before the more agile quads were catching up to and passing their bulkier cousins. The Polaris, ridden by Van der Walt, features a constantly variable transmission and proved particularly effective in the sand. The 200 class riders had their work cut out in the sand as the little single-cylinder engines worked very hard indeed. By now, De Villiers had managed to pass Costello, but it was still close, and they hadn't yet completed 1/10 of the race distance.
The 200 cc's are disadvantaged in this race because they don't have the same powers as 250. And as you can see, these guys don't seem to stay in the track. They're bouncing all over. You've got to move your body weight to drive the bike. It's very important. Otherwise, you're going to end up high-siding and landing with the bike landing on top of you.
This is Jan Lotter, on and off the throttle as he makes it all look so easy. Francois Coetzee rides for the Jojo Tanks team alongside Struig, and he's also aboard one of the lethargic-sounding four-stroke Honda models. Another Honda rider is Fani de Jong, but unlike Struig and Coetzee, he's aboard the 330cc two-stroke version that Vickers van Deventer used briefly a few seasons ago. On one of the popular Yamaha Banshee models, Jan Smit was looking forward to a finisher's medal. Last to begin racing were the bikes, and it was the dedicated rising star Clayton Enslin who drew first and would start ahead of 200 class rider Wayne Farmer, as Spencer Creel started third ahead of the maestro Alfie Cox. With little separating the performance of the top 20 starters, it was going to be an interesting race before racing order resembled the usual pattern. Who was going to stick their necks out and seize the opportunity, and who was going to adopt the cautious approach? By the time the two-wheel brigade started, it was a lot warmer, and the cars had been racing for 2 hours. Still, a large crowd remained to watch the bikes begin their adventure. Clerk of the course, Peter Monsieur Wilson, counts them down, and then turns his back on the departing rider to avoid being showered with sand. Young charger and early race leader Clayton Enslin had his race strategy all worked out.
There's some fast guys coming from the back, and I think if I can just maintain a constant pace until we get to the sand, and then I can make another strategy from there.
By the time the bikes entered the riverbed section, the front runners had already caught up to the tail end of the quad field, and the different techniques required made for interesting comparison. The two-wheelers' approach seemed far more brutal and ferocious compared to either the quads or the cars. Last year's winner, Graham McLaughlin, stepped up to the open class for this year's race and looked absolutely committed as he ducked and weaved between the trees. Similarly, teammate Jeremy Davies was showing all the style that took him to championships almost a decade ago. A few years ago, he broke a leg badly and moved to circuit car racing, but the lure of off-road racing proved too much. Passing cars is a tricky maneuver aboard a bike. Darrell Curtis shows his fearless style despite a punctured rear tyre. Quinton Milton hails from Port Shepstone and is regarded as something of an enduro specialist. He looked very smooth, as opposed to Rian van Niekerk, who was really hanging on the cables. Unlike the cars and the quads, the bike boys were racing as though there was no tomorrow, and were treating this 1,000-kilometre desert classic as though it was a sprint race. KTM's Jeffrey Wallater is one of the most consistent riders on the scene and was being chased hard by fellow AGA Panasonic Castrol KTM team rider Carl Leroux, who was on one of the bigger 360cc versions. After a series of bone-breaking crashes over the past 2 years, Errol Dalton seems to have at last regained the form that took him to victory here in 1995. Panasonic Russell Campbell Racing's Greg Aspinall hasn't been racing in the off-road championship for long, but the former motocrosser has quickly established himself as one of the front runners. With the tracks between trees being very narrow, passing any other competitor was never going to be easy. Shell Honda rider Grant Broomfield picks his spot before passing 200 class quad leader John Craig Costello. Once clear, he quickly pulls away and makes it all look very smooth. Watch Peter Milan fighting his Kawasaki KDX 200 through the soft sand, and you can see the effort required. To win here, one has to be very fit and have bags of stamina. Reinecker and Houghton were in complete control of the production category and fighting it out with the Chepex Raceco Porsche for the overall lead. As the production and special vehicles are in separate categories, the overall lead means little in terms of championships. But drivers are a competitive breed and will always race each other as though their lives depend on it.
Well, you know, we've got two categories of racing in the vehicles. We've got special vehicles and we also have production vehicles. And all the competitors actually race to get to the line first because we consider the guy who gets to the line first as the winner.
Following in Bahrain's dust cloud was Richard Carolyn, who won this race in '95. And you should know about that, Brooks.
Yeah, I did. It was one of the races we shared and I really had a wonderful time, and I was so proud to win the race because at that stage my boot had never won a race. And it was just a wonderful feeling for him to cross the line first and get the checkered flag, and ever since then he's been going faster and faster.
But all the time, the Epson V-Motors Raceco, driven by Franz Czepek Jr., was pulling away from the other special category contenders. Recently, Nardus Alberts and Peter Mathieu have suffered in the reliability department, but that seems to be behind them now, as their VW Rapsa Raceco sounded crisp and looked to be in good shape. Little villages dot Botswana's countryside, and the townsfolk seem to enjoy the spectacle as much as any race fan from around the world. The Birkin brothers blast past and have a commanding Class E lead. Having lost drive to the Sabat Land Rover's front wheels early on, Tony and Mandy Yo were finding the going tough. Schilling and Thorne were on a charge in the big Motortech Jimco V8 and were chasing the pace set by the Chepek team. Harper and Chalupsky raced the ex-Schilling Championship-winning Raceco and were also running reliably at a strong pace. They'd finished well up on the two previous events and were looking for a good points haul here.
Yeah, they got a new gearbox in the car, Phil, and that's helping a lot since I've changed from the Porsche box to the Hewland box.
Rob Walk won this race driving this car in 1994, but knew that it'd be a difficult act to follow this year and still had time for a friendly wave. There'd been no problems for Lambert and Hendrik Fourie in the Digidor Raceco, and they were on course for a good result. Like Walk, Carolyn, Bahrain and the Chepeks, Lambert had also won this race since it moved to Botswana in 1993. Like most drivers, Veslau was battling in the thick dust, and having an impatient Coetzee and Swanepoel right behind him could not have been easy.
It's very difficult under these circumstances where there's so much dust, because when you catch up to a competitor, the only way he's going to know you there is you've got to give him a nab in the back. And the reason you do that is the guy who's in front, he can look in his mirrors, but all he sees behind him is a dust cloud. And that's why Cassie was getting a bit frustrated, and he's just let Wilfred know, I'm here, let me past.
In Class B, Newton Love and Colin Pote in the Quickfoot-backed Raceco were in a strong position. The Frankenberg brothers were cruising along at a steady rate of knots, not wanting to risk anything on the opening day. They seemed happy enough, though. One of the first contenders to strike problems was Rob Walk. His hopes of a good result were dashed shortly before the service park, where he lost over an hour effecting repairs. The sight of the service point was a welcome break from the ardours of fighting 2 tons of heavy metal through twisty sand roads, but there wasn't much work needed on the ultra-reliable Toyota Land Cruiser.